return to Nazareth. The story's pretty straightforward. You have Joseph receiving another dream. The angel tells him what to do. And he tells him to get up and go back to Israel because Herod is dead. And so he returns. We don't know exactly how old Jesus is at this time. We know he's somewhere between probably 1.5 and 12. We're not real sure, but probably. And we know he's in that range because we have events at 12 years old later on, and we have the events at 1.5. But based on how long Herod ruled, we were probably only talking 2 to 3 years. His death was sort of sudden, and it was not. He didn't live to be necessarily a very old man. So it was probably only a few years, maybe 5 or 6 would be my top guess. But as I said, our outer constraints are 12 years before Jesus was 12 years old, because he's visiting the temple on 12 years old. But on the way, as they get closer to Judea, they realize that, or they hear that Herod's son is ruling now in Judea, particularly Archelaus. Herod was there. When Herod died, he was a little problematic for Rome, so they made sure that he couldn't, that his successor didn't cause the same problems. So they split his area of rule, his kingdom, amongst 3 different rulers. One was given to his eldest son, one was given to a middle son, and then one was given to more of just an appointee of Rome. Was created more of a direct rule from them. And so the Archelaus in particular, so Herod, Archelaus, was ruling in Judea. The other one, his younger son, was actually ruling over the area of Galilee, which is where Nazareth is. But it appears that it's not just the fact that he's Herod's son, but that the reports that are getting to him is that he's almost as bad as his dad. And so he's like, well, if I go to Galilee, that son's not quite as bad, so we should be in good shape if we move there instead. But it also indicates that this was given to him in a dream as well. He's getting these reports, he's worrying about this, like, what should I do? And an angel comes to him in a dream again and tells him to go and settle in Galilee. And so it's not just his decision, but it's a something that God intended to happen, and God's directing him in. So he goes and settles in the district of Galilee, and he goes and lives in a town called Nazareth. And then Matthew includes this Old Testament quote, but it's not a quote. If you look at your scripture portion, there's no, it's not marked as an Old Testament passage. And the reason is it's not actually a quote from the Old Testament. There's nowhere in the Old Testament that you will find this word. And that's Matthew indicates this in the way he writes it. Every other time where he quotes a passage, he either says it was prophesied by Isaiah or Jeremiah or David or the prophet, if he's just being more general, or one of the prophets. In this case, he says this is what was. Let me just read it. What was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. It's an indication that he's drawing from multiple sources. It's not just one specific thing that he's referencing, but it's something that many prophets have mentioned, which gives him an indication that this was something God intended. There is some argument over exactly what he means by this. I believe there was a good answer to it, and that's what I've included in the study guide. But there is, of course, those who argue against these positions. Some would take only one, some would take neither of them. But to me, it is a solid argument that this is what God intended to do. So, some interesting facts: Nazareth didn't exist in the Old Testament. It wasn't a town that was established until after Roman rule. So it was a fairly new town. It wasn't just it wasn't one that had been around for a couple hundred years even. So this is something that, unless God was just going to randomly prophesy something, a name that's not going to come into existence for many years, he has to describe it instead of actually name it. So this is like the route God is going with this. He's going to use what he says in the Old Testament to indicate something that the name means in the New Testament, which is pretty impressive in my opinion, and part of the reason I think it's a good reason to believe this is that it's the way God does things. He is able to work out details that we can't. So first off, Nazareth. And there's a mistake right there. I hope that's not in the end result. The Greek word for Nazareth sounds similar to the Hebrew word. Well, the one I'm looking at right now, which may not be the final one, is the one I'm safe to type on if I want to. But I say the Greek word for Nazarene instead of Nazareth. Big problem there. Anyway, the Greek word for Nazareth sounds like the Hebrew word for branch. So it's sort of a homonym type thing, but it's crossing languages. So something that sounds similar to another, but doesn't actually relate. And so the Old Testament is full of prophecies about the Messiah being related to the branch. I quote Isaiah 11:1 here: "A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit." This is referencing David's father, Jesse. And then a similar quotes in Isaiah 4:2, 11:1, all the way through 5 is referencing this idea. 53:2, Jeremiah uses similar imagery in 23:5-6, 33:15-16, Ezekiel, Zechariah. So it's not just like one prophet prophesied this, but multiple prophets prophesied this idea that out of the branch, out of a stump, would come the Messiah. The lineage of the Messiah would ascend through the stump of Jesse, the branch of David. And so the fact that Nazareth sort of has this similarity to the word branch makes it an interesting sort of point back to the Old Testament and say, it's similar, it's something related. Now, it's not in and of itself a conclusive argument, but then there's a second element to that, in that Nazareth was a very undesirable place. It's not where people want to move. Not for its wickedness or for its problems, but for its sort of backcountry, not important, no major trade routes go there. It's the place where, there's one Dairy Queen and maybe a hardware store. It's not the place with the Walmarts and the Targets and the Starbucks. They haven't even heard of Starbucks out here. I understand. I my dad grew up in a place like this, and we lived there for a few years on some family property, and we didn't even have a hardware store, um, but we had a post office. um, but this is the kind of place that he's living, and in Israel, they don't think highly of this place. Um, and this is shown even in the Gospels when Nathaniel is called, come meet Jesus. His response is, Nazareth? Can anything good come out of there? And this is someone who becomes a disciple of Jesus, like someone who's really wants to follow God, is actually looking for the Messiah. But his initial response is, really? No, not from there. There's nobody coming from there. So, wherever that place that you like, oh, I would never move there. I would never want to be in that place. That's where Jesus is from. That's the kind of location he's claiming from. And in Isaiah chapter 53, which we just quoted a moment ago, I referenced a moment ago, it talks about Jesus growing up like a tender shoot, or he grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. But then he continues, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. So we know Matthew is saying that this is fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. We don't have a prophecy that is specific that points us, we would look back and say, he's reading from, Psalms 64, he's reading from Isaiah or something. And so we're looking at it and saying, what is he meaning by this? And I think these two elements are good indicators of the kinds of things he's referencing. He's referencing these Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah coming out of the branch, and these Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah not being expected or thought highly of. And of course, we see these, and these these are Old Testament prophecies that the Jews would look at and say they're about the Messiah. So these are things that they would have an idea about. It's not some obscure thing that he's not quoting. It's something that's common. It's a big theme that they're expecting, they're looking for. They know he's going to come out of David. They know he's going to, be despised and rejected. But again, they're not looking at it in the same way. And Matthew's pointing out and saying, what God was attempting to do is describe where Jesus was going to grow up, what he was going to be like. And in these prophecies that seem a little more obvious, like he's just going to come from David, he's going to be a descendant of Jesse, and God's saying, no, I'm describing that he's going to live in a town called Nazareth. And he's going to live there from the time he comes back from Egypt all the way up to about 30 and a half years old. And that's what God was doing. He was revealing these details, but even though the town didn't actually exist. So he's showing us what it was to take place, even though we couldn't even pronounce the name of the town yet. It's not a Hebrew name. It's a Greek name. It's, a town that the Jews at the time of Isaiah wouldn't even know of. They wouldn't be able to even pronounce such words. But God's revealing where Jesus was going to live. And that's what Matthew's making this point of, is God had this plan so detailed that even where he ends up living is prophesied in the Old Testament. And and he's only in chapter 2, and he's already like, all right, don't you see this is the Messiah? Don't you see that all this was fulfilled? And I haven't even told you what he's going to teach yet, but all these prophecies are being fulfilled, and he's not even 12 years old.
Sometimes we want to blame, or we want to give our past, and we want to give where we're from, or what we have, or what we don't have, so much power to dictate whether or not we're going to obey God, whether or not we're going to be faithful to God. We blame it on, well, I don't have education, or I don't have, my family is poor, or this or that. And God's working through those details. He's working sometimes despite, but many times because of those limitations, allows God to work bigger things in our lives.
Yeah. One of my favorite verses is Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And it's often misused because people often think of it as God's going to make everything good in my life. But he's not what it says. It says, and we know that in all things, God is able to work for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. It's not that, he's going to let you live in a nice place, but he may put you in Nazareth, and he's going to use that to work for your good. He's going to maybe have you work in that job that's not that great, but he's going to use it to work for your good. And it's what God does, that he uses the small stuff, the stuff that we think is unimportant or we don't like, and he uses that to bring himself glory, to carry out his plan. And when you look back at it, if you're willing to let God use you, and you look back at it later, you're like, oh, that was interesting. I didn't expect that. I didn't, that was what I didn't, want to happen. But I see how your hand was actually at work.